Hello and welcome back to Paddock in Track, the show where we bring you news on and off the track. My name is Amaan and I'm joined as always by my co-host Max.
Hey guys.
And today we bring you the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. And I think it was an interesting race.
Yeah, it was definitely, especially the battles for the lead was very exciting to watch. In those last couple of laps, it was really good to watch. It was a really fun race.
Yeah, definitely.
So hopping into the qualifying, Leclerc takes pole, which is definitely a good thing for him to be starting up there. And we know that Leclerc is usually fast over one lap, but he seems to have a love-hate relationship with
this track.
He's had some good results, especially good qualifying results, but then we also know he's crashed into the wall at that castle corner once in real life and once in sim racing, so we know he probably doesn't like that
but he also holds the track record for the track, so it's like, yes, as you said, a love-hate relationship with it, and right here I think it's a love relationship, but yeah, I think it was overall.
Yeah, so a good result for him. Also, Piastri up in second place, so good qualifying for him. And then Sainz in third. So clearly Ferrari was quick here.
Yes.
And we saw that throughout the race that they had pace, but that's good. And then Perez up in P4. So
finally strong.
Finally a good result in terms of qualifying, at least for him. Because we've seen him had a lot of Q1 knockouts, Q2 knockouts, and so him into Q3. Of course, he wasn't on pole, and we know he's run well at Azerbaijan in the past.
Yes.
But still, P4 is better than 16th, 18th, whatever. So, of course, Red Bull, I'm sure, will be happy. What they won't be as happy with is Verstappen down in 6th.
Yeah.
Of course, that's still Q3, right? But at the same time, it's like it's the 3-time world champion, and he's not doing super great here. Definitely, that's not what you want to see from Max Verstappen.
And sandwiched between those two Red Bull is Mercedes' George Russell.
Yeah.
The only Mercedes driver that did good in qualifying. I mean, but Hamilton had his car modified under Park Farm rules.
Yeah, so he was forced to start from the back of the grid then. From the pit lane, actually.
Yes.
And so that's obviously a disadvantage right off the start, and then it's very hard, I think, to recover from there. It's a little easier when your car is better. We've seen that happen. But usually I feel like once you start from the pit lane, it's kind of downhill from there because you really can't make up as many places as you'd like.
Well, and he's not the only one in the pit lane. Joining him is Alpine's Esteban Ocon, who also had his car modified under Park Farm rules.
Yeah, so for both of those, it's not... Obviously, nobody wants to start from the pit lane, but that's really not a great spot to be in, again, just because in terms of like making up positions and finding points, especially for somebody like Hamilton, who... we know has a pretty decent car. It's unfortunate for him to be starting down there in the pit lane when it's something that realistically could have been avoided.
Yeah.
And then another thing up in Q3 is both Williams, but I think the more important one is Franco Colapinto in P8 out qualifying his teammate Alex Albon.
Second race he's been in that car, and he's looking strong.
He does look really good. He qualified 8th, Albon in 9th. Really impressive from Colapinto to out-qualify the Alex Albon, who has had much more time in F1. Of course, Albon hasn't been in F1 for that long, but still a lot more experience than Colapinto. Colapinto's raced now 2 races, like we said. So really impressive from him to see him up into Q3, but then also ahead of his teammate.
Really good for him. And then in P10, we see Oliver Bearman, who is replacing Kevin Magnussen, who's serving his suspension for picking up his
many
12th penalty.
Yeah, he had enough penalty points that he got a 1-race ban. So Haas called on their reserve driver in Oli Bearman
and their future driver.
I was gonna say. And so again, another good qualifying for him. He's in Q3. That's more than some of these drivers can say behind him that have years more of experience,
including his own teammate Nico Hülkenberg.
And so we see Hülkenberg down in 12th. So that's still Q2, which is not horrible, and it's like sort of the top of the Q2 knockouts. Second highest, of course, but that's not a horrible start from him, but it's. Some of this track I think is tricky to overtake. The front straight is real long, and that's great, especially that they've extended the DRS zone. But for a lot of this track, it's very tricky to overtake. So it's helpful to be starting at a higher position.
Yeah.
And then we also see Yuki Tsunoda in 11th.
And Daniel Ricciardo in 14th. Not the great. I don't think this race, it wasn't great
no,
for
it was
VCARB
not
at all. Specifically for Yuki Tsunoda. We'll get into that later. But overall, I feel like the VCARB's pace was not really great at all during this race. And we just didn't really see them like capitalizing on any opportunity at all.
Yeah. And the biggest surprise is Lando Norris out in Q3. It was a very weird situation.
Yeah.
I believe what happened is Norris had gone for one lap, and it really was not a quick lap because clearly, I mean, he was in 15th.
Yeah.
And then he was on a fast lap and then there was yellow flags. He had to slow down, and so he didn't improve, and then he just pitted at the end of that, and so really was unfortunate for him, and he was able to make up some decent points some decent places during the race.
Not more than that. I mean, he made up a lot of places actually.
Yeah, and so it was, but of course, again, when you're trying to contend with Max Verstappen, you want to be starting up higher. Of course, everybody wants to be starting higher, but especially when you're going for the championship against Max Verstappen, you really need to be starting.
To be fair, he did finish in front of him though.
Yeah, so and that is a fair thing I think you can say is that, I mean, he had better race pace today, and I think one of the battles that we saw showed us the pace comparison between the cars, which we'll get into. But in terms of Max Verstappen versus Lando Norris, it was clear this race that Lando was faster.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. And then we obviously see the Saubers finishing behind. We also see Pierre Gasly disqualified from qualifying.
Yeah, so he had the car was not up to regulation, so he got disqualified from qualifying. He was lucky enough to be allowed to race by the stewards, but yeah, unfortunately, of course, again, starting P18 is not great.
Yeah. Before we get into the race, though, we noticed a difference in the McLaren car. Their new flexi wing.
Yeah, so this was really interesting, and now they've had to remove it after they've gotten complaints primarily from Red Bull, which makes sense.
Yeah.
But it was really, really cool to watch. And it's really an interesting like engineering thing.
Yeah.
Because when you watch, they didn't show a lot of the camera from facing like out back of the car and where you could see the wing, but when you could, it's really cool. You could see the corners of the wing just start to fold up a little bit.
But as you pick up speed across the track.
Yeah, and so that's like, it's almost like a mini DRS. And that's so helpful because the DRS, again, at this track can be very, very powerful and very helpful down that main straight. And so having that, having the flexible wing was super, super helpful for them. And I think especially Piastri when he was defending Leclerc, which we'll talk about here in a minute, but as Piastri was fighting, he was really able to keep up pace even when Leclerc had DRS and things like that.
I mean, I think it's also interesting to see like the different like engineering things that like these teams like bring to the table. Like last year we saw the RB19, how they designed the car and how much better they were, and right now we see McLaren as the fastest car, and we see that they put something on the wing, like they changed their wing, and that also helps them a lot. And we've seen complaints by Red Bull. I mean, that's really amazing by the McLaren engineers when designing the car.
Yeah, and that's always one of those things that's like, it's always kind of a funny part of Formula One racing is that they're always trying to find loopholes.
Yes, 100%.
And that's one of those things where you really have to find that one guy who can read the rules so well that he's like, well, it doesn't say that we can't do this. So then you get really, really specific, and you're finding every single loophole you can possibly find just to make your car that much faster, 10% faster, 5% faster. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, what you're looking for, I think, is that improvement.
Yeah.
And that's really one of the interesting parts of the Formula One as a business is just finding those loopholes in the rules and doing everything you can to make your car even like that tiniest bit faster.
Well, I also feel like it goes both ways too. I mean, if you're taking a risk here, going out of the norm, because we've seen Mercedes in the past, they tried their zero pod concept, which did not actually work at all.
Yeah.
And so when you're taking these risks, obviously there's a big risk when it comes with it, but also if it works, I mean, it pays off a lot. And we see here in this race, a lot. We see McLaren actually it worked a lot.
Yeah, it really did pay off for them.
Yeah.
So getting into that race, one of the first things I noticed was Norris. Again, we said he's down in P15, but he was starting on the hards, and I think that was
a really good strategy.
Yeah, that was a really good choice by McLaren. We saw the medium was not a fast race tire, and the hards were really helpful for him to just get up, get positions early, and just stay out. And like we saw him and like Alex Albon in
consistently
like
up
way
there.
up high because everyone else had to pit off those mediums early. And the hard was just kept going, and so that was really a good strategy call from McLaren to put him onto the hards because it really worked and helped him to gain a lot of spaces.
Definitely, for sure.
And then we saw Perez getting past Sainz very early into the race, which was definitely important for Perez. Again, as Perez is trying to prove himself that he is, especially the backlash that he's gotten from the fans, I think.
For sure.
He really has to prove that he is the one for this seat. And so him getting past Sainz, not only is it good for him in the race, but also good to just try and dispel some of the rumors and things that are going around about how maybe he's not cut out for the Red Bull seat. And so that was great for him. And then a similar move from another Red Bull, Verstappen getting past Russell very, very early in that race, basically into that first corner through that second corner. And that was key for Verstappen as well, just to get past Russell. And then, again, Verstappen kind of starting somewhat out of position for where he would like, of course.
Yeah.
And so that was helpful for him to try and make moves on some of the leaders. Of course, we saw it didn't really work out the best for Verstappen, but still it was an important move to make for him early on in the race.
And then we see Lance Stroll hits Yuki Tsunoda and gets a puncture in his tire. But more importantly, he cuts a gash into the side pod of Yuki Tsunoda, which Yuki did stay in the race for a bit.
Yeah.
But eventually, it was too much damage, and they had to retire the car eventually.
Well, I mean, looking at it, it was a lot of damage.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that Yuki really just did not have the pace.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, like, Max Verstappen in Azerbaijan. Last year, they had a sprint, and in that sprint, Russell and Verstappen came together, and there was a big hole in the side of Max's side pod. And it reminded me of this incident. Just seeing there was really, like, a hole in the side of the car, and that, of course, really impacts your ability to be fast because now you've lost so much downforce and aerodynamics of the car. So that was a big problem for him, and this was a big problem for Tsunoda, and Tsunoda ended up having to just retire.
Yeah, I mean, I found it interesting that they, like, kept him in, but it was, you could clearly see he lost so much pace after that too, and it just wasn't... Yeah. It just wasn't feasible to keep him in the race. And I think it was a much bigger hole than what Verstappen had, too.
Yeah.
And, it was unfortunate for him.
The other thing that I noticed right off the start was Colapinto and Bearman did a really good job on that start. It is not easy to start an F1 car. As someone who has never done it, it's not easy.
Ask Lando Norris.
Yeah. But and they did a really good job. They both held position. And of course they're not gaining positions, but still it's something to say. Considering they've both had 2 Formula 1 races now. Yeah. They were able to hold position, so that's reasonable. And 8th and 10th is nothing to sneeze at. When you're starting, so you're starting around people that are quick, and so just holding on to that is good for them, and it really shows that they might have what it takes to. Well, we know that Bearman already has a seat, but Colapinto is kind of showing that he has what it takes to maybe have a seat next season. Like a full-time seat.
I think he definitely will.
I think
he definitely has a shot of getting a seat.
And then we saw Norris already up to 12th by the start of lap 2, but he kind of ran into some problems here is that now he was behind Yuki Tsunoda.
Who's having problems, the gap between Yuki and, I think it was Bearman, was increasing. And Norris, he had a little trouble getting past it. It was like...
Yeah, well,
it took longer than it should have.
Yeah, and part of that is, so Yuki was real slow because of that damage.
Yeah.
But the problem is just simply that, like I said, it's kind of hard to overtake in Azerbaijan because a lot of it is it's pretty narrow for a lot of the track. And there are a couple overtaking opportunities, but there's just not enough time on a lot of them, except for like the front straight.
Yeah.
And so that's really what Norris needed. Eventually, he got past Tsunoda.
But the gap was still large.
Well, yeah, so there was a big gap then from him to Bearman in 10th place. And so, you know, it was important for Norris to get past him fast, and he was able to get past him, but I think maybe had he been able to get past
I think he would have
Tsunoda,
finished higher.
Yeah, like I think he would have had at least more time to catch up to maybe 3rd place and get up into those podium positions. He just really did not, it hung him up a lot.
It definitely did.
And it impacted, especially the early part of his race.
It goes to show, like, how much small events could, like, impact your race. And Lando did a really good job this race, but it goes to show how much more he could have done more if he had more opportunity of overtaking Yuki earlier.
And if he had started higher up.
Definitely, yeah. If he didn't, like, if there wasn't that Q3 goof.
Q1 yeah, goof, with the yellow flags. Yeah, he might have had a better shot at least.
Definitely.
Making it up higher. But continuing with the race then, Norris, well, I suppose continuing with Norris as well, he seemed to be doing really well on the hard tire. Again, we saw a lot of people having problems with the mediums. Verstappen said he was struggling for grip. And in the hard in general, the people that were on the hard seemed to be doing a lot better. The people that were on the medium seemed like they really wanted to get off of them. So clearly, I think they didn't have a lot of data on that medium tire, and the track was so hot that it really was not a good race tire.
I mean, wasn't Leclerc on the medium?
Yeah, Leclerc. Most of
the top three.
Most of the top couple of drivers. There's a few dotted in there with the hards, but a lot of the top 10 drivers were on that medium tire.
I don't think Leclerc also did that bad, but that also goes to show like the dirty air that forms in this track.
Yeah.
I think that also had like a very big impact on a lot of these guys' races, and I think that also like was in part of their tire degradation with the medium tires.
And then I also noticed, again, going back to Colapinto, he did a really good job maintaining position.
Yeah.
Albon was gaining a little bit consistently, but not a lot, though. You know, Colapinto was able to keep a decent gap around a second for a lot of that race. And I thought that was impressive for, again, somebody in their second race.
Yeah.
And Albon, who has much more experience, much more time in F1. And yeah, like, you know, the biggest thing I think with F1 is the management of the energy systems.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, it's faster than F2, but really the energy system is, I think, a big thing because just one more thing you have to think about.
Yeah.
And so he seems like he's been able to handle that pressure pretty well.
Well, him and Bearman, I think.
Yeah. But just, you know, we've been able to see Colapinto recently, and I think it has gone to show that he can handle that pressure and he can take that pressure.
Definitely.
And then we also saw that Verstappen and Russell were both pitting pretty early.
Yeah.
Already lap 13. I mean, there's not a ton of laps in the Azerbaijan Grand Prix because it's a decently long track, but still on lap 13 they was pretty early, and they were just done with those mediums. Especially Verstappen was complaining a lot about the mediums, and he was just like sliding all over the place. So he was not a happy camper on those.
Yeah, definitely.
And then Perez was really close to Piastri after Piastri's pit stop.
Yeah, I think this is important.
Yeah, it was very, very close on the exit, and that I think solidified the fight between Piastri and Perez, and then eventually Piastri and Leclerc and Perez.
Yeah.
That really put them in like that position of like being really, really close to each other, and from then on I feel like they were pretty much close to each other like the rest of the race.
Yeah, so they decided to keep Piastri out a lap longer than they should have, and so that means that got Perez closer. That also set up the fight as well.
Yeah.
But I feel like, what would have happened if Piastri did pit a lap earlier? Would it have been a larger gap, or would it just been?
They probably would have had a little bit better gap, but I don't know how much it really would have affected him.
Yeah.
Because of course Perez did have to go through like tire warm up on that first lap out, so it's hard to say how much it would have helped him. But I think maybe pitting Piastri a lap earlier would have just been helpful to defend against Perez.
Yeah, especially at the end of the race.
And then we saw Sonoda again having to retire. He had dropped back a lot of places since basically once Norris passed him, he really started losing places. He just had no pace at all, and he had to retire. And then we saw Piastri going past Leclerc, overtaking him for the lead, and then from then on, it was like Piastri just managing this fight.
Yeah.
That was really impressive to watch, because I think those races are probably the hardest ones to drive, because you're just on the whole time. Like, you have to be paying like the utmost attention the entire time, because you're fighting with someone.
Yeah, Leclerc would never went away during that race. He was always within a second of Piastri.
Yeah, so a really tricky race for Piastri. But he did a good job handling that and managing the gap and managing his energy systems and things like that.
It's only his second year, and he's doing things that like veterans do.
Yeah,
it's really insane.
Yeah, so it's really, really impressive from Piastri. I think in his rookie season, I feel like a lot of people were thinking of him sort of like Hamilton in his rookie season. And I feel like this season he does look like Hamilton did in his early seasons.
Yeah.
He was just so good. And even like so early in his career, and he was just really good already. So he really looks like he could be a world champion. Not this year, but I think he looks like he could. Yeah.
Especially if McLaren keeps up with their development. I think it'll be really good.
And then we see this big fight emerges between Piastri, Leclerc, and Perez. So Piastri's leading, and then Leclerc is second, and Perez is third.
Yeah.
For a little bit, Perez kind of dropped back, but eventually he caught back up, and he brought Sainz with him.
Yeah.
This was such an exciting fight to watch, because it was so close the whole time.
Yeah.
Again, I think that the flexible wing on Piastri's McLaren was helping him out so much.
Yeah.
Because Leclerc would get the DRS down that main straight, and it's such a long straight, but he was able to stay ahead even without Piastri was able to stay ahead even without that DRS assistance, and so that I think was crucial to him being able to defend.
Yeah, I think out of this entire fight, I think Leclerc had the hardest job, only because he was stuck between a fast Piastri and a fast Perez.
Yeah.
Leclerc had to manage his energy really well, because he has to defend Perez. He had to think about defending Perez while also trying to get past Piastri. So I think he was just like stuck in a limbo right there.
Yeah.
And so I think he needed to rely on the help of Carlos Sainz to try and like alleviate some of that, which Perez did bring Sainz in.
Well, and the problem is too is that Leclerc had been so close behind Piastri for so long that he'd been running in that dirty air for a long time, and that really takes a toll on your front tires.
Yeah.
And then just driving hard. Of course, he's probably pushing for like a lot of that time, and so that'll also hurt your tires. So his tires are starting to go off over time, and it just becomes harder and harder and harder to defend and to attack in front of him, and so I think that's what we started to see right at the end. Leclerc's tires were gone. They were done.
They were.
He had you kind of hit a point where the tires are fine, and then I think you hit a point and they just fall all the way off, and that's the point that Leclerc hit. And
he voiced it on the radio too. He said that his tires are just completely gone, and it was like 4 laps left.
And you could tell like Piastri immediately was like pulling way away, like 2 seconds off from Leclerc, and then it was real close between Leclerc and Perez and Sainz, and I think really it culminated in a very bad time for Perez and Sainz, because. So Perez, eventually going into turn 1, had finally was close enough to Leclerc to go for a pass, but Leclerc managed to stick with him a little bit, the tiniest bit, and going into turn 1, like Perez lost so much momentum because Leclerc took that inside line,
and they almost touched. The cars almost touched.
Yeah, they were really close, and then Sainz was able to, because he just carried so much more momentum to the corner,
get past Perez.
Past Perez, and then they go through turn 2 and onto the next straight, and it was tricky. So eventually they collide. Yeah. And they take each other out of the race. But Perez and Sainz hit each other, and then they were both out. But it was tricky to say whose fault it was.
Yeah.
I feel like there's probably a bit of blame to be placed on both drivers.
Yeah.
On the one hand, Sainz was moving a little bit over
to the mid. Yeah, he was.
Which is reasonable because I think the track narrows a little bit there. And so I think it was fair for him to want to move over.
But Perez definitely had a lot of space to move as well. So they didn't. It was unnecessary.
Yeah, I feel like, yes, Sainz was moving maybe a little left, but also Perez had a lot of space to his left that he could have moved over
as well. Yeah,
and I think you have to consider that. I mean, they know what the track is like. They know that the track is going to narrow there. So I feel like Perez should have considered that he knew Sainz was probably going to be coming over. And then he should have given him a little more space. Like, I get that they're racing, but you still have to leave each other space.
Yeah.
And so I think there's blame to be placed on both drivers.
Definitely, yeah.
And it's really hard to say, like, to put it on just one person, to say one person's at fault. And of course, you can't, like, give anybody penalties because, well, they were both out of the race.
Yeah, they both crashed, so.
Ultimately, it was bad for both of them.
I think especially for Perez.
Yeah.
Because he finally got a strong weekend, and he was doing so well this entire race, and it's just a shame that it had to all end right there.
Yeah, it really was. It was, yeah, like you said, it was a bad weekend. What could have been a good weekend for Perez just turned into a really bad weekend for him very quickly. And it's unfortunate, again, like we said, he's trying to prove himself as the option, the best option for Red Bull, and I don't feel like, I feel like he almost did that this weekend, and then I feel like the crash just kind of shows, like, maybe his awareness, his racecraft is not right.
This would have been like the first time he finished in front of his teammate too, and I think that would have been as much a statement to the doubters and the haters out there on Sergio Perez. So it's very unfortunate for him, and also Carlos Sainz too. I mean, he's just trying to make the most out of that for the last of his Ferrari days, and it was really strong showing for him as well. But it's just unfortunate.
So looking down the rest of the grid, then, so a win for Piastri. I think that's pretty big for him because, well, Hungary, one could argue that it wasn't necessarily deserved, and I go back and forth on that personally, but I think this was a very well-deserved win from Piastri. He really had a good race, a solid race that he was fighting a lot, pretty much the whole race for. And so it was very good from him. Leclerc in P2, so that's, I think, important for Leclerc to be getting those points because I think Norris is looking ahead to Max Verstappen in terms of the Drivers' Championship, where he should be, I think right now, he should be looking behind him to Leclerc, and to see that Leclerc is genuinely really close to, I think closer than Norris realizes in terms of points.
He's been having strong showings too.
Yeah, and also this is great for Ferrari to have. Of course, it's not great that Sainz was out, but it's good for Ferrari that Leclerc was bringing in a lot of points because
it brings them closer to Red Bull in the standings.
So Red Bull, of course, has not really been picking up the most points recently, and Perez has not been helping them as much as Max Verstappen is, and as much as they would like. And so this it's unfortunate for them, but also it's great for Ferrari, who's of course wanting to get higher up in that constructor standings. And then Russell in third place. I feel like we really didn't talk about him, but I also felt like he was just kind of there.
Yeah, he raced. He just did his job.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like Austria, right, where a collision happened to bring him up into the lead. This time he was not first, but
he just took advantage.
He was in the right place at the right time, and things happened in front of him that helped him out. And of course, it's great for George.
Yes, for
he'll
sure.
be happy, and Mercedes will be happy that at least somebody got a good result.
Yeah.
And then Norris in P4. So again, I mean, he made up 11 places. He was able to get past Verstappen. And it is impressive. I think a lot of that comes down to the strategy. Like we said, him starting on the hards was really big. But, again, getting up into P4, it was close there at the end.
Yeah.
With Max Verstappen, the gap was pretty big, and he reeled Max in pretty quickly. So a good race from Norris. Verstappen P5, so not what Verstappen will be looking for.
Yeah.
And then Alonso up in P6. So
we didn't really talk about him either at all.
Yeah, but a good result for Aston Martin, who they're kind of on their own little world in the constructor standings. But, still, I mean, gaining points is never a bad thing. And for Alonso, he's going to be sticking with the team now for
At least 2 more years.
At least 2 more years, yeah. So, it'd be good for him to just have a little more confidence in that car.
Yeah.
And then Albon and Colapinto both picking up points in 7th and 8th.
That was really strong showing from Williams this
Yeah,
weekend.
so really great from them. And then Hamilton in P9, another driver. Again, I feel like there's a lot of drivers we didn't really talk about that much this episode, but Hamilton coming from the pit lane and finishing P9 is very impressive from him. And then Bearman P10. So also points for him. Of course, a lot of this comes down to the crash at the end. Brought people up a couple places, 2 places, but still, I mean, points for Bearman is huge.
Pretty good. Finished in front of his teammate Nico Hulkenberg in P11.
Yeah, and then down the rest of the grid is ultimately what you'd expect usually. We see the Saubers 14th and 16th, so 16th is essentially last as there was 4 retirements.
Yeah.
I don't really know what Sauber's doing anymore, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I don't know.
And Ocon started from the pit lane, so 15th is... Yeah, it's kind of what you would expect from Alpine.
And also the 4th DNF that we did not talk about is Lance Stroll. He had brake issues, so that he just eventually retired. I mean, it was irrelevant, so we didn't really talk about it.
It was a big deal. But yeah, I think that wraps it up for us. It was a really fun race to watch, especially that ending. And yeah, we'll see you for the next one.
Goodbye.